Without further ado, let me take a moment to introduce today's speaker. Hilke Schellmann is an Emmy Award-winning journalism professor at New York University and a freelance reporter holding artificial intelligence accountable. Her work has been published in the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, New York Times, and MIT Technology Review, among others. She's also an author of the book, The Algorithm, on how AI has already taken over the workplace and shapes our future. Welcome, Hilke.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming out on, such a beautiful day. I just flew in from Brooklyn, and I could say you have the better weather. So, Chris, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for bringing me down. Sorry that last time I was very ill. So thank you for rescheduling me to her at another time. I have a 5-year-old who is in pre-K and brings home all kinds of germs. And they don't tell you, they tell you that your kids will get sick, but not that the parents will get it twice worse. I don't know whether it's like telling that parents to be, but I come to this. So I studied AI for the last 8 years, and I had a chance encounter that got me on this path. And because, a lot of folks always ask me, how do journalists find their stories? And, I find a lot of stories by reading other journalism and having sort of questions, like a lot of other articles that I read or videos I watch. I often think like, oh, you sort of touch on that, but what does this really mean? And then I go down the rabbit hole. But this whole topic about AI in the workplace, I found by taking a lift. I was in Washington, D.C. at a conference of consumer lawyers in 2017, had nothing to do with AI. I think they still don't have anything to do with AI, to be honest. But I needed a ride to the train station to take a train home to New York. I caught myself a lift, got in the back seat, and asked the driver how he was doing. And he told me, he's like, I'm having a weird day. And in the history, I don't have a car, so I take Lyft, you know, somewhat often when I travel. And I've never had that somebody, usually everyone says like, oh yeah, I'm doing good, whatever. And he's like, I'm having a weird day. And I was like, how so? And he's like, I just had an interview with a robot. And I was like, what? And he's like, so he had applied for a baggage handler job at Ronald Reagan Airport. And, an hour or so early, he got a phone call from a robot asking him 3 questions. And this was in the fall of 2017. I'd never heard of this. And I was like, oh, can I, take out down your number? Can we talk again? And he's like, sure. It's such a weird experience. And so I made a note. I used to carry a little notebook. Now it's all on my phone, of course, where I put like sort of my story ideas and made a note of it and kind of forgot about it until 2 months later, a colleague of mine was giving a talk at a conference at NYU. And in the afternoon, there was somebody who had just left the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the first Trump administration, which is the quasi-regulator of the world of work in the United States. And she was giving a talk, and there was no one there except me and like 5 other people. And she was talking about that she can't sleep at night because companies use AI, or, very, very basic algorithms at the time to go through their employees' calendar to check how many hours you are at your desk. And that would sort of check how productive you are, if you're more hours at your desk or not. And she felt like, hey, this could really, the people with the highest absentee times in the United States are mothers and people with disabilities. And those are protected classes. And she was really worried that those people are going to get retaliated against or fired, and that would be unlawful. And then we started chatting, and I was like, have you heard of robot job interviews? And she's like, I don't know, but I've heard of one-way video interviews. And there's a company called HireVue, and you should really talk to their former head of data. And I did talk to that guy. The next day, I maybe understood 1% of what he was saying, way over my head. But I got really interested, and I looked into it. And even in early 2018, I was at the Wall Street Journal at the time, and I was started to look into it. It started to be pretty widespread. So this is sort of what, I learned a lot of HR lingo. This is what they call the hiring funnel. So when you apply, there's like different stages of hiring, right? Sometimes recruiters will reach out to you and they build sort of an applicant pool, or you apply. And they used AI there. So if you ever uploaded your resume or your cover letter on LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, all of those companies use AI. And I know that because I talked to their head of product or whatever, head of machine learning. They're not technically, they don't have to tell us exactly how they use it, but they do use it. And then we also see it when you apply to large companies. When you go to their website and apply there, they also, most of them use AI, and they use it in it's called APS, applicant tracking system, which used to be a glorified spreadsheet, which sort of checked like, oh, you applied, here's your resume, you were rejected, you're in the next round. And now all of these, Oracle, Workday, all these big companies have AI built into these tools. And then we also see it in the interviewing stage. I don't know, has anyone done a higher view interview here in the room, or one-way video interview? My students in New York have all usually done one because it's so ubiquitous. If you wanna work in investment banking, for some reason they like AI screens. And also if you want to work in like Target or Walmart or Warby Parker, and all kinds of companies use that kind of technology, and often for what they call high volume, high turnover jobs, which is often, sort of retail associate, right? Like Walmart hires, I think they do 10,000 interviews a day or something. I mean, it is like the largest hiring machine in the world. So this kind of technology applies often to companies who get a lot of applications. So when I talked to some of the companies, and this a couple of years ago, probably the volume of application has gone up. So Google gets about 3 million applications a year. IBM gets about 5 million applications a year. So this kind of tech that we see in hiring is sort of geared often to large employers because they get inundated. I mean, small companies also get inundated by applications, but they sort of, maybe they have 2 jobs a year, so it's sort of handleable. But if you are a large company and you get, so for example, Goldman Sachs runs a summer internship. I think they hire like 800 or 1,000 students every year, and they got over 225,000 applications a couple of years ago, probably now more. So HR, talent acquisitions team, they complain about like, we can't handle all of these applications. Help us. So this is where sort of this tech comes in, and then we see it. So we see it in interviewing, and then we see it in selection and sort of assessments, like coding assessments. But we also see it in I don't know if anyone up here had to play games to find your personality. There's now games that you can play where you have to pump up balloons. You'll see one in a minute. I went down the rabbit hole and did all those games and played all those things. But it's pretty widespread. If you in 2025 apply for a job, you probably are likely going to encounter AI if you want it or not. And AI is not a bad thing in general, it's just a technology. But what was interesting to me is like the companies, the AI vendors that came out, they all said like, we're doing this great thing. This is going to be democratizing hiring because AI will look at every application, right? It's not going to get tired like a human recruiter and only look at, the first 100 applications. We're going to look at them all the same way. We are not biased. And this is going to be much more efficient and save you money. Yes, for most companies, it is much more efficient. Time to hire, which is one of their measurements, going down. So they have people in seats much faster. So it's very efficient for them. But we haven't seen actually any evidence that this is not biased and sort of picks the most qualified people. And I think that's sort of my ethos as a journalist, to go down there and like sort of understand what goes on inside these machines. We know so very little about this, and we make very high stakes decision on it. Or so I feel like, it matters to me what job I have, right? Like I have to feed my children, I have to put a roof over my head. So if I get rejected because I'm not the most qualified candidate, I can live with that. But if I find out that I was, rejected because of the flawed algorithm, I'd be pretty pissed and upset. And I think most people would be too. So I wanted to share some examples of what I found out and how AI in the world of work is used. And I also learned along the way maybe a couple tips and tricks. So I wanted to start with HiredU, which is one of the largest companies that does these one-way video interviews. So there's no one on the other side. So you just like have your phone and you get like pre-recorded questions and you answer them on your computer. And just for scale, they do about in 2022 they did the 30 millionth one-way video interview. And when we did the math, it's about 10,000 or so a day. that's kind of these kind of interviews that they do. And we did in 2018 when I was at the Journal, we got access. We went to, oh, sorry, the video here. We went to South Jordan and Utah and visited them. So I want to show you a clip because you sort of see how AI works better than I can explain it. And we use some graphics, I think that kind of thing. So it's a 2-minute video that we did for the Wall Street Journal. And my colleague, Jason Bellini, is the correspondent. They go on and on talking about like, will people be watched or not? But you sort of get the gist. What's kind of interesting, so I called this talk, Steal My Method. So one of the methods that I used here is actually, so Nathan keeps talking about like, oh, we as the AI vendor, we never reject people that's on the company. And I was kind of like, wait, like the company pays so much money to these tools, and don't they want a ranking of people and then only want to call the first 50 people instead of like 2,000? Like if I'm a recruiter on LinkedIn, I don't really want to have a folder with 500 applicants. I kind of want to rank who's the most qualified, or the algorithm thinks it's the most qualified, I should say. So I was a little baffled. But what I did is I found out, so I use a lot of freedom of information requests. And, HireVue is a private company. They don't, technically can send them a request, but they're never going to answer it. But I found out that in Atlanta, the Atlanta public schools were using HireVue to hire teachers, the AI product. I was like, oh, that is a public entity, so let me fire them. So I sent them a request and got 500 pages back of emails between HireVue and the Atlanta Public School. And in one of the emails, it actually said that and Nathan had written that this is an assessment, and if anyone who scores under 33% would be automatically rejected. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting because you told me something else. So those are kind of really good methods to hold companies accountable. We don't necessarily know what's built into the machines, but in sort of training manuals, emails, like there is sort of an assumption. You can read what kind of values people build into these tools. There was another email exchange between the head of HR and HireVue talking about, so in this case, you see the tool is calibrated by video interviews of teachers who have previously taken the video interview and are now successful, right? So whatever they answered the same questions and whatever facial expressions they have, intonation of their voices, and the words that they use will be sort of the training data for successful people. That's how the model is built. And so, there's questions if this works at all. But the other question is too, you want to have successful people in the pool, right? Because that's how you calibrate the machine. So in the emails, the HR lady did say, like, I don't trust our own teacher success program, but I just need a spreadsheet with teachers. Just every spreadsheet, we need to build this AI tool. And I was like, wow, if you don't even like put the most successful people in it, how would this tool ever work? But you also probably see, now we're in 2025, we got, I think, because of I would argue, a lot of media exposure to AI, we are much more critical. So most people right now will say like, well, the facial analysis, like, what is that? How does that work? In 2017, 2018, everyone was still blown away by this kind of technology. Like you saw like that, when I first started at a conference, I was like, whoa. Like you see sort of the graphics on people's faces, reading our facial expressions. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that facial expressions in job interviews are predictive of your success in a job. Who knew? Wow. Like the machines found something that we as humans would never come up with. So, I always think it trust but verify. So it's so interesting. Let's verify this. Let's talk to some psychologists who study this. And they were like, what? Facial expressions? We have no science on that. I was like, oh, why are we using this if we don't have any science? So I think that is sort of a theme that comes up again and again in AI and use cases. Is like, yes, we have technology that can actually check out facial expressions, that can actually check, like, am I smiling? Am I frowning? It's very accurate in reading that. But actually, is this data meaningful? Like, does it actually mean that when I'm smiling, I'm happy? And most of you probably have been in job interviews, and I had smiled in job interviews, and I was zero happy. And so that's not a given, but also obviously, like, we don't actually know what facial expressions you need to have in a job interview to predict how successful you are in a job. Like, that isn't actually a meaningful thing to check. It's a sort of correlation. We call this, like, in sort of the machine learning group, we call it like a correlation soup. Maybe it is predictive, but is it meaningful? Does it cause it? If you have the right facial expression, you're going to be successful in the job? No, of course not. Not causally related. So we see that a lot. And I think also one thing to say about journalism is, and like, does this stuff have impact? And, impact is slow. Sometimes we take 3 steps forward and we take 7 steps back, or so it feels like sometimes. But in this case, what was pretty cool, so like the video we did made a lot of splashes, and then the Washington Post a year later had an expose on higher views, similar concerns, and then there was a legal complaint by a Washington, D.C. legal group, Epic, with the FTC against higher view, and they did abandon the facial expression analysis, and they also did abandon the intonational voices analysis, which is the same thing. There's actually science behind it, that is predictive of anything. So there is small progress. Sometimes in this marketplace, I call it kind of like a whack-a-mole, because, we finally, higher view stopped using the facial expression. And then I went back to HR Tech, which is their big conference in Vegas with 10,000 people every September. And, there are 2 other new vendors that do facial expression analysis. And they're like, we found this like plugin in Python. And I was like, great, but how do you know that it's meaningful? How did you validate this, that this works? And they're like, oh. So it feels a little bit like we just have talked about that it's not working. Why are we doing this? But hopefully they will see this and stop using it as well. And then I also found, I talked to a lot of people who are employment lawyers or quasi-employment lawyers who come in when like AI vendors talk to companies, and some companies do their due diligence and bring in outside counsel and lawyers to check it. And they checked a lot of resume parsers. So when you have a AI model and the new resumes come in and the model says you are a yes or no, like, what does the model actually predict upon, right? What is it on your resume that makes you a yes or no? And what's interesting, they found thousands of keywords. And in fact, when I talked to some of the companies, they don't often know how many keywords are being used. They're like 10,000, 10,000. And I was like, oh, you don't know? Strikes me as interesting. So I think what happens here a lot, and that's the same with higher view, the technology that vendors use is what it's called deep neural networks. And you don't need to know what that means, but it means that you have training data that you give to the model, and the model sort of builds itself out of the training data. So you don't know necessarily what is happening inside the model and what does the model predict upon. So for my spam messaging, I don't think that is a low stakes environment. Totally works. We should totally all use that. But for human hiring, it's sort of like, shouldn't we know what the model predicts upon? So these lawyers that got an inside view, they looked into some of these resume parsers, and they did find some difficult words. Some of the resume parsers, one of them used the word Thomas and Alzi as predictors of success. Others used, well, I know, who knew that Thomas, the word Thomas, qualifies you for jobs. The other one was like locations came up again and again, Canada and Syria. So in the United States context, this could be discrimination based on national origin. There was race-based discrimination. Some tools used the keywords Africa and African American. Another one used, if you had the word baseball on your resume, you got more points. If you had the word softball on your resume, you got fewer points, which would be gender discrimination, right? Because more women play softball in the United States. Yeah, ask.
So they just put these in as like indicators for rejecting?
No, they're not human generated. So what happens is like, it's probably coming from companies that use people who are currently in the role as successful employees. So I don't know, you have like 50 accountants, want to hire new accountants. Some resume parsers are sort of more traditional, and you just program them, or you tell the computer, hey, look at the skills that people have that are in the job description and match the resumes towards that. So it turns out those traditional, their work, but almost everyone is a yes, because a lot of job seekers are smart and they look what's in the job description. So does generative AI, which job seekers now use too, right? Like it looks in a job description, here are the most important skills, and to make sure that you have that on your resume. So most of the resumes that come in to recruiters or hiring managers' inboxes, they are yes. So it's not a good method to actually sort of smaller the applicant pool. So what companies do is they use like, oh, we have these 50 accountants, they're all successful, they work here, right? We had to reject so many other people. So those are the unsuccessful people. But here are 50 successful people. Take those resumes, feed it into the machine, and ask the tool to understand what do these 50 people have in common. And so a AI tool doesn't have conscientiousness, ethics, morality, right? It takes every word that is on a resume and does a statistical analysis. And I guess in this case, it found that there were a bunch of Thomases that were successful, or they had the word Thomas, might also be Thomas Manufacturing Plant, right? What do we know? But it found that the word Thomas on these resumes was statistically relevant, and then it becomes a predictor. Same with like probably locations. Who knows? Maybe somebody who's from Canada was hiring other Canadians, right? Or that's how those words get into it. And the AI tool does what it does best. It does the statistical analysis and found out that like, I don't know, 5% of resumes have that word on it. And that is statistically significant, becomes a predictor. The same with, these things. I don't know, maybe somebody played softball in the account department and found hired other people from their baseball, from their baseball team. And, the tool figured out that if you had the word softball on your resume, you were not successful here. And we often see this. There's a famous example. Amazon built also an AI resume screener years back, and they had a problem. They found out over time that the tool started discriminating against people who had the word woman or women on their resume. Because, it was for sort of tech part of their company, and where they have more men, we have that disparate gender impact in a lot of tech companies. They have more men than women. And so the resume parser over time learned that people who had the word woman or women on their resume are less successful here. So they should be on the no column. Again, did a statistical analysis. So we see this again and again, right? And we see this in employment all the time. We have biased hiring in the past, right? We have a lot of unconscious bias in hiring. Humans are terrible hiring people too. I'm actually advocating we should go back to that. Because we make decisions based on horrible stereotypes, often unconscious. If we are hungry, we make worse decisions than we are fat. It's not very good either. But sort of the problem here is if we have biased data that we feed into the algorithm, the bias will be in there unless we check it. And the problem is that most companies don't really have a lot of appetite to check the tools because that costs more money. They hire more people. HR is always seen as a cost center. So you want to save money there and not necessarily start checking on models over time. So we see this kind of thing happen, unfortunately, again and again. And then I have another example from, these are kind of tools that I tested similar to the one-way video interviews. This one were audio tools where you get a phone call. And, I thought, so a lot of these tools, same with HireVue, they check the words that you use to understand how how successful you may be at the job. So it uses a transcription service to transcribe the speech into text. And I always wondered, was with people like me who have an accent, people who have a speech disability, do the tools work as well for those people as for people who don't have a disability? It was interesting to me. I talked to the chair, the head of the EUSB, and she asked me the same thing. She's like, how do they work for people with speech disabilities and accents? I was like, why are you asking me? You run a federal agency. You should ask for that, not me. So I tested some of these tools, and HireVue and other companies have told me, I was like, well, what is it when people have speech disability? What happens? And they said, well, we have to, you have to reach a minimum threshold. And if you don't reach that, then the company gets an error message and a human would get in touch. So I thought that was happening when I taught German to the tool because I didn't want to fake a speech disability or something. But I thought like, well, I speak German, of course. Nonsense. and I get, human will get in touch. There's an error. So we did this for a podcast. So you get, at least in some way, in some instances that should be a real question. I also get like about 80% when I just said the word, I like teamwork. I said that about 80 times and I got an 80% match for the role. And I was like, wow, it's easy to like all these tools. And, then we did some more things like deep fake my own voice. And there was no one in front of the computer. I was on the side typing in my answers, and then the deep fake would generate my voice. And I also got a score. Didn't even notice that no one was in front of the camera. So that's a security problem that we see now in a lot across hiring. That people swap each other out, right? They have somebody else who's a much better coder take their coding assessment, and then if this other person shows up on day one, we had that for job interviews. It's a huge problem, and the companies don't even have the basic security to make sure that there's even a human in front of it, right? Let alone the right human. So we'll have a massive problem with that. And so I want to tell you, like, test these tools yourself, right? You can do this. If I can do it, I don't code. I have no knowledge of that. You can do these tests. Anyone can. And, other companies have like a 2-week trial period. That's usually what I signed up for. I signed up with my name. They could have checked that I'm a journalist, but I guess I didn't. And then we also, in, good journalistic fashion, we call the companies too before we go. We always, we call it no surprises journalism. Everyone who gets written about gets a chance to comment, and we reached up to that.
Before we go, we want you to know told the companies behind the systems we tested about what we did and about our results. And this is what we heard back. Curious thing AI think this Bethesda has system. My IO do too. And they also got on home with us to talk about what we found. Clayton Lonloy is my area's industrial organizational psychologist.
But that defaults toward your unapplied value content. Because the content you can see, it's like it's random nonsense. So it won't be then unless there's so to do.
So you were saying that I didn't pick the content at all into consideration, just the intonation of my voice. And I scored 70% match. Like the intonation of my voice was a 73% match with Google.
Yeah. Well done.
Okay, so he says the system understood that you weren't speaking English. But if the system's fault the intonation was low, I still don't understand how to pull a full personality that answers on me. Showing, for example, that I'm a way more innovative than consistent.
How do you find the sound of my voice? That happens all the time too. Like, in this case, they also had a personality analysis of me. That's also very dubious that you can find that. Also, it turns out I did so many of my interview tests and I had like opposite personalities in some of the interviews. And I'm like, well, maybe I have multiple personalities, but it's kind of interesting. But like, this is my last example. It's just the gamified assessments that we see a lot of in investment banking and large companies that use that. And it's sort of like is for CEOs who love the buzzword of like agility, learners, like they love, they want like agile employees, like, they don't want a Python programmer today because, in 2 years might be another programming language. They want somebody who's agile, who teaches themselves, right? So how do we find those people? It's not it's really hard to find it on your resume. And so companies came up with this great idea. Let's do some gamified assessments. Let's let people play. And you'll see here, I'll just, this doesn't have any audio. This is me playing the games, and you see how slowly I read instructions. But, this is sort of what you get. You play like 10, 12 games, and they're, again, calibrated with like people who are currently in the role. So you have your 50 accountants play the game. And if they are risk takers or whatever personality they have, then job seekers get compared to that. If I'm a risk taker, I'm sort of generalizing this, or I get on the yes pile. If I'm not, I get on the no pile. And here you see me pumping up balloons, and you're supposed to collect the money before the balloon burst. I quickly sort of understood that like the blue ones take much longer to pump up before the burst, and the yellow and red ones, the burst much faster. Company thought no one would ever find that out. But it was interesting, like this is supposed to be checking how much of a risk taker I am. And while I was playing the game, first of all, I always thought, I was like, what are they trying to find out with me? What does that have to do with anything? But what's kind of interesting is this, like, this is supposed to check like how much of a risk taker I am. And I did wonder, I was like, well, maybe I'm just a maverick in video games, but am I really a risk taker in real life, right? Like, we don't actually know that. That's one of the questions. But then also the question is like, is risk taking actually part of that job, or is that just something random that these 50 accounts or whoever you test that have in common? Or is that really a skill that you need in this job? And that is like one of the things that we see again and again, like sort of in these games, AI tools, like we use every word that's on a resume. When we really should be looking at, like, we know best practices in hiring. It's like sort of, look at the skills, the experience, your capabilities, and not the schools that you went to. In fact, we know that it's unconscious bias of humans, right? If you went to Harvard, a lot of human hiring managers think you're smart and you must be good. So they going to invite you for an interview when we really know from social science that it has much more to do with your background and your family history and your socioeconomic background and not actually with your intelligence, right? So we really shouldn't be looking at that. But so we see now these kinds of games. I was worried about that. And when I talked to IO psychologists, they were really worried that the company only tests this on successful people. And one of them told me, well, that's sort of a problem because we did this in Australia with a big medical conglomerate, and we wanted to hire nurses, and we had nurses do an assessment, and then we compared them to the general population. And it turns out that successful nurses are more compassionate than the general population. So you would think, well, you need to hire people with a nursing license and who are more compassionate than the general population. Problem solved. And then they also looked at, like, well, the unsuccessful nurses, what are they in comparison to the general population? Turns out they're also more compassionate than the general population. So that's actually not the predictive factor, right? So you can't just look at successful people. You have to also look at unsuccessful people. So we don't actually see that in a lot of these companies. And here's another game that they let you play, which I think is sort of gets me to the last point of maybe one of the most important points. Is in this case, I'm going to just scroll with you, see the instructions again. Here you have to just choose a hard task or an easy task. See, I'm a very slow reader. I get also try to understand what am I supposed to do here. Okay, Hilke, get the footing here. So you have to choose a hard task or an easy task. And then your job choose a hard task, is to hit the space bar in these like 12 seconds and get the space bar to fill up. And I was like, what is that with a job? Like, I don't think there's a job where you have to hit a key on your keyboard as fast as you can. What are they testing here? And when I played the game with Henry Claypool, who is quadriplegic, he was really worried about, like, wait a second, like, what is with people who have a disability? Like, on most basic level, have a motor disability, right? Who can't hit the space bar as fast as possible. They might be equally qualified for the job, but they might not pass these assessments and get rejected. And that's because they're disabled. And this is sort of the question again and again. If we calibrate, most of these AI tools are calibrated by looking at your current employees. You have a massive underrepresentation of people with disabilities already in the workplace and not in the training data that trains these algorithms. And then also disabilities are often presented pretty individually, right? Even if you have somebody who's autistic in the training data, the next person who has autism, their disability might present itself very differently. So how on earth can these people be represented in these kinds of assessment? And we really haven't done, the EOC and other regulators haven't looked at this, even under the Biden administration. Obviously, under the Trump administration, there's like way less interest in this. But that is sort of another case study, but we did another test. This is another personality test that we did on this is going to pull out your personality out of your social media. There's all kinds of tools. We also see this in workplace surveillance. Now that companies it's called employee listening. And when it first came up, that word, I was like, oh, sounds great. Companies now care about the employees. They're listening to employees. Well, it's a euphemism for monitoring and surveillance, because it means that AI reads every word that you type on a work computer. It like checks all the Slack messages, all the text, all the Google Drive, all like if it can analyze Teams meetings to check if you were bullying meetings, do you talk over people, all kinds of predictions. It can flag things to HR or IT. Are you, if you print too much or you move files too much, that might be a signal that you're stealing, that you're leaking company, uh, uh, their own intellectual property. So we see all kinds of those tools proliferating in the workplace. I was trying to find good use cases, but I think the companies that pay for it sort of want these kinds of use cases. But this is what you can do for AI accountability. So one of the things I did is like now scripted questions. You can ask for accuracy validation tests, and they're called technical reports. I looked at a lot of them, and even if they're not public, you have to get them from the companies, which I think is one of the things that I criticize. I wish companies have to show how they've validated these tools. Like, how did they make sure that they work? What went into this validation process? And some of them actually test their tools on like college students between the age of 21 and 26. And I'm like, great. How can you say this generalizes across the population to older people, right? Like, we don't know that. And then you can, do the benchmarking against traditional assessments. We did that with some of the personality that I didn't get into. We used traditional personality tests and then used the social media test. And, again, we had multiple personalities. You can benchmark algorithms against each other if they're supposed to have the same thing, right? Like if you have two algorithms that are supposed to find your personality in social media fields, they should have the same things because you only have one personality. And you can bring your own data sets for testing. You can create edge cases like me speaking German. You could crowdsource the data. That's a little bit harder, but we see that sometimes in the European Union that people try that because they have a general data protection law where if you are subjected to a technology, you can ask the company to tell you how did they measure you, or like what data they have on you. And that can give research of like kind of clues into what the company uses. Then, the FOIA request that we did. And then I often partner with academics and build larger studies. But thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And I'm open for any questions. Yeah.
Did you agree?
I only know that from the companies. I have to tell me that, right? But I know that from FOIAs because I FOIA purchase orders as well. So I know that Atlanta Public School, I think it's like 100,000 or so they're paid per year, and they hire about 100 and so teachers. Yeah. And the companies takes care of like building the model, servicing the model. They say they test it every year. So it's usually, and it's sort of like that we see more and more. So large companies will have some sort of in-house place that does that. But then smaller companies are kind of like public entities, like Atlanta Public School, I think is 3 people in HR. They're not going to like sort of check models or something like that. So they, in the subscription is sort of a fee for hire of you to do that model testing. Which, is sort of a conflict of interest in itself, right? That, the company tests their own models if they work and they're not biased. Of course, they're going to be good models.
Rivals in this space? Who's trying to hire?
They bought their biggest competitor recently. What was it called? They used to work with Walmart, so I think the HireVue bought them, so they bought their biggest competitor. But they're a bunch of others. There's like Spark Hire, Talview, and but HireVue is definitely the largest of them.
Does it ask the smell test you that choose a validity aside bias? Companies are saving $100,000 your HR costs.
I mean, the companies keep using it, so I'm assuming this is helping them streamline their work, right? Like they have to have less humans interviewing people, and they get a ranking, and they only have to call like the first 20 people on the list. So I think it's like a saving for them. We see like, with generative AI, we now see that there's like even more applications, right? Because it's so much easier to use ChatGPT to like polish your resume or generate a cover letter. Maybe this will also be the depth of the cover letter. Not that really anyone reads them, but um, so we see the volume of applications have gone up. So recruiters are more upset and feel like they're drowning even more. So we see actually companies flocking to more technology solutions. They're going to use this more than less, unfortunately. But it keeps working for the company. It is more efficient, I guess, and it saves labor costs, which they care about. So they keep using this technology. You would think it's in their business interests that they make sure that it's working. And I think that's sort of what I was so confused by when I first had a phone call with the legal counsel at the EOC. I was like, well, we've shown again and again that there are problems in these tools and some of them are really flawed. And, like, why aren't you doing anything? And they were like, well, first of all, like, it's not like we're not in the business of checking that they have a good business case. We just assume that companies would do the right thing and do something that is predictive. But we've seen again and again that even when humans did the hiring, right? Like, I don't know if it was Google with like the glass of the marbles, like how many marbles are in this glass. I'm like, I don't know, but that is predictive of anything in hiring, right? It's not like we always use the most validated tools to do this. But it seems like companies like these solutions. Is it the best solution? I doubt it. I mean, the good thing is with HireView, at least, they stopped using the facial analysis, which is predictive of nothing. And actually, yeah, you could think about if you have mostly men in the video interviews, that like their facial expression might be different from women's facial expression and might inadvertently reject more women or something like that, right? Like it could actually lead to bias. I think what's also interesting, so I think job seekers for a long time thought that something is up because, they spend hundreds and hundreds of job applications and then never hear back. It goes into the void and it's really frustrating and a depressing process. And they think like, I know I'm really qualified. Why do I keep getting rejected? But we also know now from surveys of C-suite executives who buy this technology. So there were a couple, and one of them, C-suite leaders, over 2,000 were asked, like, if you use an AI tool, does your AI tool reject qualified candidates? And almost 90% said yes. So they know that the tools reject qualified candidates. But I guess it's such a saver of time, and maybe they distrust humans too to find the right people, that they keep blocking and using them. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tadika Boko. I'm the Life Sciences faculty. Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested and curious to know if there will be a longitudinal study on the financial aspects of benefits over time, because I relate this kind of like to a new medication coming out. It has to go through all these trials and everything, yes, but they only last 10 years or less. It's not until 20 years or more that people have been on the medication and you find out there's cancer, there's all kinds of problems. So I'm just that analogy seems to be one that could be applicable to here in terms of how much are they really saving. Yeah, in the long.
I mean, I wish, for me, it's not so much of a, money is like the prerogative of a company if they want to spend it on that. But I worry about like, well, this is actually work. Like, what harm could you do, right? So I did like, I did think that maybe some of the large companies would have longitudinal studies or would do like sort of A/B testing where you have like, or like 2 tracks where you hire people, you just hire people and then you check, did the AI label and the human label actually work out? So the AI labels you green, red, or yellow, right? Like yes, maybe, or no, or whatever, like the different labeling things. And then you check after 3 years, did the green label succeed? Did the red label not succeed, right? And obviously you can have a small sample size because people do jobs for whatever reason. You have to have a massive scale. Like this is for big companies to hire lots of people to actually check. And you would think if you make such a big investment in this kind of technology that you would want to check. To my knowledge, there is no checking. And I've tried, and I've also tried to talk to companies and be like, I bring in social scientists, we do longitudinal studies. We will help you. This will be helpful to humanity to test this over the long term. No one has shown any interest to actually test it, which I think sort of goes to, it's not, I think that the incentives are sort of misaligned here that AI companies build the tools. If something goes wrong with the tool, they don't necessarily want to publicize that. I sort of can understand that because that's the likelihood. But I think what's also interesting, at least in the United States, companies that use the technology when something goes wrong, they also don't want to publicize this. They're very quiet too, because they're afraid of lawsuits, right? They're afraid of getting the pushback that Amazon has gotten, where they said like, oh yeah, we use this for women got downgraded, or people who had the word woman or women on their resumes get downgraded. They're afraid of class action lawsuits, right? Because, if one tool has been used of millions or hundreds of thousands of applicants, that could be a massive class action lawsuit. So they're not talking about it either. I've talked to a lot of CHROs, sort of the C-suite HR leaders, and they're like, yeah, we use, Pymetrics, the games or whatever. And we didn't think it worked either. Just quietly abandoned it. And I was like, I mean, that's good. Good for your company. Glad you tested it. Glad you had questions. Could you tell that to the world? Because it would be good because so the next company knows about this. They don't buy the tool either. And maybe you also give a chance to the AI vendor to change the tool. But we haven't seen that. They just don't want to publicize it. I think they're just really afraid. There's a question in the back. Yeah. Yeah.
In your experience, okay, we face this. So the products and services, you have these consumer business practices, you have these neutral forums that can redress consumer concerns, same thing with EOG and environment. The AI and all the malpractices and biases that it has, in terms of accountability, is there any AI vigilante group or is everyone just going along with it?
I mean, they're not in the Fortune 500 realm. Like, I think the Fortune 500 now use 99 or 100%. AI, not in every, different for every company. Some use it in the screening of resumes, some use it in the AI video interviews, right? And they're not being regular. You don't have to tell anyone. So we don't know this. We just know because they use certain instruments or something. I go to these tech conferences and they talk to me. So we don't really have that. And I sort of talk to people, I've talked to sort of consumer lawyers and I'm like, you really need to classify this as a consumer issue and like attorney generals, right? That I feel like because people are forced to be consumer, I call them forced consumers, right? Because you want to have a job and you get a link and says like, you have to do this video interview within the next 72 hours. Are you going to say no if you want the job? Probably not. You're going to use the technology. And only in the state of Illinois do people, they have an AI disclosure law. So if you use AI, you must, AI video interviews, you must disclose it to people. I think nowhere else you have to disclose it. So people wouldn't even know this, right? And sort of HireVue has two products, like with AI or without AI, right? Some companies just use the video interviews and then some poor human has to watch thousands of interviews, or thousands of videos. So we don't necessarily know that AI is being used on us. So I think there are people who want to see reforms, but we're not seeing a lot of momentum on the federal level for sure. And now we're seeing sort of this patchwork that we often have in the United States, right? Because nothing is happening on the federal level. So you have New York City has an AI hiring law that is in effect almost 2 years. It is zero teeth. So companies can sort of claim for themselves if they use AI to make meaningful decisions. So it could be that so what we see is we use AI for rejection in the early round, right? And when there is a high likelihood when you have like 10, 20 people in the applicant pool, then a human gets involved, right? You still have human interviews at the end of the hiring process. So if companies, they can sort of self-diagnose and say like, oh, well, we have still like humans involved. So we don't have to audit our AI tools. So we have about like 50 companies or so in New York City who have self-audited and published these audits with, there are thousands of companies that hire there. So that law there has been no enforcement. So that law doesn't work. Colorado is doing something. California is pretty trying to be aggressive, but they're sort of like back and forth because they're also home to a lot of tech companies. So we don't really see clear enforcement or clear regulatory ways. The only thing we see is sometimes you can look to the European Union, right? They have a much more closely regulated structure. So they have the GDPR, and that's actually been helpful in my reporting because I found some people in Europe who were subjected to these tools, and they kind of knew about some of the GDPR, and they asked for their data, and out of that data, I can then make sense of what is sort of happening inside of these tools. So very helpful for us. The EU just passed the EU AI Act that actually outlaws the facial expression analysis all in the European Union, except for some very carefully, you have to get a judge to sign off if you want to use it as police or something for very small cases. Sometimes we hope that what happens in the United States often with California and cars, for example, if they have had very high emissions regulations, then all the car makers will go to the higher standards, right? And just build cars for that because they don't want to build cars all over the world with different standards. We don't really see that for AI tools. That was the hope, right? Like the Europeans are going to sort of tighten the regulation. The companies then will rule out AI that is compliant in the European Union, and they will, the worst of the stuff will leave the US market as well. We have not seen that. In fact, OpenAI is now something they offer in the European Union and something they offer in the United States. So they are, they try to be compliant for the different jurisdictions, but they've just built different tools. I hope that somebody will pick up the case and sort of understand this is a consumer issue, and it should be more regulated like a consumer project, and it should be checked if it works or not. But we haven't seen that. And the pink shirt, and then, with 3 questions here. Yes.
Currently, this is a red flag, it's been politicized, and a lot of the people, particularly political slant, talk about want to hire the best people. The EI doesn't necessarily hire the best people. And yet, we're hearing here that these AI programs used by Fortune 500 companies are weeding out people that aren't necessarily qualified, or they're kind of dismantling qualified people. Is there any conversation at a deeper level about the interplay between DEI and
Yeah. It's sort of a real interesting thing, right? Because, I think sort of what the Trump administration is hoping that if you get rid of the DEI, then you have merit-based hiring. I think that's sort of the underlying assumptions, right? But actually, we don't have a merit-based system. I think we are, in sort of the vision in theory, we would love to have that, right? That's what we are all striving for. But in reality, everyone, so many people have unconscious bias. We have tools that may or may not work really well and have bias. So we don't actually have a merit-based system, and it could then harm others. And usually what happens is at least in AI, is the people that are already marginalized, they're not in the training data. So they also will be marginalized by these AI tools, but now have sort of a mathematical objective layer on top of that. And sort of that's the problem, and no one is looking at that. And there isn't sort of a whole lot of appetite to mandate any kind of disclosure, transparency. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So once you're part of either the training data set or the applicant data sets, and the AI companies say HireVue, for instance, has your data, what do they do with it afterwards? Are they allowed to sell it to other companies? Is there any transparency on the data that is a part of the set, what happens to it, or even the data that's received?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I wonder about that too. I mean, the HireVue, certainly other companies that use HireVue, if they build an AI tool, they will retain the interviews because that is used to build the model for next year's cohort. And I don't think, the job seekers that I've talked to that have done HireVue interviews, they didn't even know AI was used to them, let alone did they give consent to have their tool be used to train other models. There might be a sort of fine print where you consent to all of this because you just click yes because you want to do this video interview, right? So I don't think there is a whole regulation of that. In fact, there's a company that this is a little different, but I was equally kind of horrified about this that I came across at HR Tech. What they do, this is used for employees in the workplace, and it's used to nudge people. It's used for, companies pay a lot of money for benefits, and then half of their employees don't use it. So the company comes in and be like, we use AI to nudge people to give them the benefits that they already have. It's great. Sounds really great. And they're like, look at Aiden. Look, if he's a synthetic person, but Aiden, like, we think he's going through a divorce and he needs a therapist. So we'll send him, a text message. Hey, we all go through dark times. You should really, sometimes you need to see someone and like talk to them and hear a list of therapists. And I was like, okay, great. Like, how do you know that Aiden, like, getting divorced and is going through hard times? And they're like, oh yeah, well, he took a spouse of his medical plan. And so that's usually an indicator of divorce in the United States. I'm like, that's true, but how do you have access to that benefit data? They're like, oh, we contract with 36 million. We have data on 36 million Americans that we directly manage the benefits for, and then we have another 100 million Americans that we buy data from. So there is a data lake out there of people's private data that gets brokers and cold. They also did sort of health benefit analysis. They were like, oh, look at Maya. She just had back surgery. We will suggest PT to her. And I was like, how do you know that she had just back surgery? And they're like, well, we have access to health claims data for over 130 million Americans. So in some instances, we know that you had back surgery. And in some instances, we know that you're older and that you all need PT for your back or whatever. So we see this kind of stuff in the workplace a whole lot. We don't know how that data is brokered, but there is a market. I think you in the yellow white shirt, and then the two people in the back. Yeah.
I didn't brought up retail and hospitality, but are there any other like big industries that you've seen using it? And are there any industries that you think like AI just absolutely wouldn't work for hire?
So we also see it in fast food, trucking. Uses a lot of AI, and then we see it investment banking. It's full of it, and banking in general. Like a lot of banks use the one-way video interviews. And then companies that are more resistant to it, I think, are small, usually non-for-profits that just, companies that hire just a few people every year. It's sort of like these tools are often used for like massive, you get hundreds of applications on a daily basis and you just can't handle the volume. So maybe they're more resistant. What we now see is sort of the platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed, they try to cater to those folks too who can't actually build AI tools in-house and bring in companies to build AI tools for them. They will Indeed will offer like sort of assessments, AI analysis of resumes for like a really small price. So you as a small company can also use that. But I'm sure some companies are also maybe are morally opposed to it and are not going to use it. There is sort of a question, and I wish I could answer that. I get this asked all the time, like, is AI better in hiring or humans? Maybe it is better overall than human. I wish I could tell you. I wish there would be longitudinal studies that we can figure this out. Like maybe we could use less discriminatory algorithms, and on a whole, they're better than human bias. But I don't know that because no one is studying it. No one wants me to study it either. I wish I could tell you that because I think that would be great to study that. Yeah, in the back.
In your opinion, how long do you think it's going to take to seep into that data?
Oh, it's already being used in academia. So we see this for at least HireVue, sometimes not the AI, but the regular HireVue is used for like grad student admissions. We see companies that suggest this, that you can do a video interview of incoming students and it pulls out their personality profile because, especially for graduate students, right? Like sort of the same thing as like with the games, you want to have agile, hardworking people, like who can like go through the ups and downs of a graduate degree, right? Like you might want to look less at academic credentials, but more personality. So there is a market for that, and that's already being used. And we also see some companies that have that track students throughout their career, so can check, through key card access, like where you go. Are you absent a lot? But it can also check if your grades go down. It might suggest to a counselor to talk to you and see if you should change your major, and get all kinds of predictions that we already see on students. And I think that's I think I think that happens a lot in these. It's like sort of this idea is like very benevolent. We want to help people, but it can also have very negative impact that we never think about. And I think that's sort of what we've seen with the large tech companies too, right? Like we thought social media will unite us all and make your world a small place. And it has done some of that. And then it also has horrible consequences for kids. So I think, and I really worry about like K to 12 and colleges where few people come to learn, and they don't know how they're being subjected to this. There's a lack of consent. So yeah, yes. So I'm not your unicorn in the brick, but I want to ask get your thoughts on this. I'm come from a tech background, 30 plus years. So I was there when 1990s unleashed the internet, and the world just kind of embraced that deregulated world of let's search everything, let's find everything, let's put everything out there, let's just do it. No regulations, no laws, no governing. Took 10, 15 years before anything started. So do you think that we see AI differently? Because trust me, they were using scripts, they were using social media, they were using the internet to filter you out from day one when you were getting hired to begin with. Do you think that the biggest concern with AI use is that it's a machine doing it faster off of learning processes versus Susie in the cubicle doing it from the keyboard, doing the same tasks, just doing it a little slower and a little bit more procedural based. So I think that maybe there's some sort of the same 1990s fear that occurred with the AI transition.
Yeah. I mean, at least in hiring and in the world of work, right? Like, I think what we see in this, I would say this is the first generation. I'm sure we'll use more technology in the workplace. We're not going to use less. Is sort of the prediction is like what we've used is like we have flawed processes to begin with, right? Like it turns out resume not very predictive. They're kind of 10% predictive or so of success in the job, but this is all we have. So a lot of people use resumes all the time, although the validity is very low. So we just automated that now into a bad process. I think that the sort of problem is like that hiring managers who looks at this, they can be really biased and they can be hungry because they didn't have lunch and they make the wrong decisions. But how many people do they hire? 30, 50 people a year? I mean, there's like sort of a limit to what humans can do. The problem is here is like these tools, if there is a problem in them, they're unleashed sometimes to all people who apply to companies. If you have like Google and you filter 3 million resumes, the harm is on a totally new level. And I think that could be a real problem here. And I think in general, we should talk about better hiring processes anyways. I mean, the one good thing that HireVue has introduced to the space is actually structured interviewing, which is sort of built into these tools that like, obviously the AI tools will ask everyone the same question, right? They're pre-recorded questions. That is actually a very good thing to do in hiring. Once you start chit-chatting with somebody and find out that you went to the same schools and you know Jane, you start seeing people in different lights, and that's actually a real problem in hiring. So like those kinds of things actually help. Go ahead.
My question is going to sound like it's science fiction territory. But so with AI that have personalities or self-aware, what would that bring to our future?
Oh, yeah. I'm like not the great person to ask this. So like I don't build AI tools, right? Like, and I sort of like, I think sometimes the AGI and like, are these tools conscious? Like, I'm sort of like distracting from sort of the tools that we already have that we should be really looking into. And like the problem is here, like some of these tools are so basic. It's like mind-boggling how basic and naive people are who built these tools and are not even thinking about what they're doing there. That is probably harming more people than sort of like thinking about AGI in the future. I do though. I mean, I look into like AI technology and I try to understand it. I'm sort of like statistical analysis pattern. Like I don't really understand how like sentience comes from that. I'm not so sure. But what do I know? I mean, Mr. Altman keeps talking all day about they're really close to AGI. I don't think anyone really knows what that. Yeah, but they're some of these tools, are very powerful. I mean, when I first saw ChatGPT, I was like, got a little nauseous, and I was like, oh my goodness, that does look like real text, right? And it can create really good text, but that's sort of it. It hallucinates a lot, all kinds of problems with it. It changes some of our tasks, but it doesn't change a whole lot of jobs yet. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Feel free to pass, but these practices seem disheartening to me. And I'm a teacher here, but we're still through graduation in the student world. As a professor, as our content expert parent, how can you work or
That was very hard. I mean, I'm an optimist at heart. I feel like I wrote this book so we know what's sort of going wrong, so we can make changes now. Like, if you're listening to me, another question. But I do think though that there are like sort of some practices that you can do. Like there is a way to like I have this at the end of the book, but I also have it on social media if anyone is interested. Like sort of I found best practices like how can you make sure that your resume gets read by a machine. So like have a skills section, have like really short sentences, crisp, anything that you can enumerate. Like you didn't save a company money, you saved them like 5 million. Like anything a computer can sort of read is helpful. There are also now AI tools out there that scan the job description in your resume and tell you how much overlap there is, and you should aim for an 80% or so overlap, not 100%, because then the tool will throw you out because it thinks you just copied the job description. So there is a way to sort of make your resume machine readable. Other than that, I think we as journalists and like maybe academics and scientists have to do more assessments here and push to change it. Like I think another thing that I found disheartening that when I talk to people who are vocational counselors or help people often with disabilities find jobs, they were talking about how these tools often don't work at all for people, right? Like if you have somebody who's deaf and hard of hearing, how they're going to do one-way video interview. The woman was like, yeah, I just answer because I speak and the tools obviously they can't handle sign language, but she's like, once I signed this and the person signed back and I say something, we had timed out. And so they have asked for accommodation. A reasonable accommodation under the ADA is the law that you can get this in hiring if you companies across more than 50 people or so. And they said we ask for ADA accommodations all the time. We never got them. So, and that is not okay. And I think we need to push against that and like sort of do more of those kinds of investigations. And hopefully, my hope is that like companies like will use these tools for a few years and a lot of them discover not as good as we thought, it's not really working, that they find better ways of hiring and like really take this to heart and learn from it. That's sort of the hopeful narrative.
So realize that's not great. And there's no real logical side or anything. It's like, yeah, this is great. Had such better employees. Our fire wages got down since we started.
No. There's like some of the AI vendors make some companies available. So for example, like Unilever said, oh, since we use HireVue, our applicant pool, and this is a few years back, is 12% more diverse. And I was like, okay, well, how so? Like, is it more women? Is it more people of color? Is it more viewpoint? Like, what is it? And they're like, oh, we can't tell you. And then, man, at the Wall Street Journal, like, we can't use it. It was like not even, like, they're not even telling us what this diversity means. So it doesn't mean anything. Like, let alone are they showing us exactly what this means. So, yeah. Yeah.
Were you able to suss out where of the hierarchy?
Oh, yeah. So very rarely for a CEO position. Also because you have, you just don't have a lot of people, right? Like to train the model, you have like one CEO or maybe a former CEO, like two people. I think most people know that the sample size would be so small that it obviously wouldn't be predictive at all. But we see it climbing. Like we see it, for computer science, we see a lot of AI assessments. Delta Airlines used AI video interviews from HireVue for flight attendants for a while. Like we saw it for teachers in Atlanta public schools. So we see it here and there climbing up sort of to more white collar jobs. How far that is going to go, I don't know. I think a lot of sort of C-suite leader are appalled by this idea, and they're like, I would never do that if the company would not try to send a human to me to but I think it sort of shows the real class classness of these tools, right? That this is used on the people, or it started being used and it's still being used en masse on the people that have like hourly jobs, that have the least power to fight back, that are dependent on sort of often low paid work, versus higher up where maybe people are saying like, I don't want to use this. Although what I now found out is that some companies now, especially, it often starts with tech company because they're like sort of, they live in this tech utopia, the technology will solve all our problems. What they now do is to current employees, there's often like sort of digital twins. So like I'm a vice president of product in North America, there's a vice president of product in the UK. And whatever sort of digital, call this sort of digital exhaust, whatever digital trail you leave, I get compared to. So like, I don't know, you sold so and so many units. I sold so and so on my team. And then it sort of looks at like, well, this person sent 500 emails. You only sent 300. What's wrong with you? They close ticket this quickly. If they do this, and it's sort of what we see is with AI, at least in job surveillance, like every job gets broken down by tasks that are quantifiable and sort of looks at like, okay, how many emails did you write? How long is your text? Like stuff that's quantifiable that maybe moves away from the idea, well, but this person really helps other people and like brings their team up. And that is not quantifiable. So then that gets left out of the job.
Current state of whatever industry, that firms like hired you are not also handling the task monitoring surveillance goes.
Often, yeah, they're often firms. Yeah. So there's usually, because I think it's like sort of often different entities, like there's talent acquisition, there's HR and IT in companies, and they sort of maybe handle different things. So there are often different companies that do this surveys. I don't know. We'll see what they announce at HR Tech. That's always the big conference in September in Las Vegas. That's where all the mergers and all the big deals are being made. I think that's actually for journalists, the people who want to research this. I love going to these conferences, especially where like all the tech companies congregate, because they're often salespeople on the floor. The CEOs are around you. They're not demoing the technology to you, but they're there to sell. So they're going to demo their technology, even though I have a big sign that's, some conference give me this big sign that says like journalists, basically like watch out. And they still show me all the technology. That's like often the only way for me to get access, because tech companies used to be much more open to journalists and now they're less and less. I do a free trial or something like that. But it's like great to see what technology is out there. And they will also tell you who they work with. I mean, they're very open. They want to sell product, which is great to gather information and to understand what is the newest thing. And then people, they wait in lunch line with you, who are the head of Walmart talent acquisition. They'll tell you, we're looking at that vendor and that vendor. I was like, oh, cool. They might also tell you, it's like, what vendor, like, did you check and we shouldn't look, and, we shouldn't use. That's also information for me. So yeah, can be really helpful.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for staying on.
On the way out, you wouldn't mind, there's a sign posted on the door, would mind